You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Saw the games,
physical basketball
I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched them on YouTube.
Anyway.
I saw the games. I watched the
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth. Welcoming you to episode 25, Into the Great Wide Open, How Spacing and Penetration Have Created a Three-Point Revolution, recorded on the morning of Sunday, February 16th, 2025. So, Bob, anything noteworthy happened the last 2 weeks since we last recorded?
Did anything happen? I mean, I swear I was in Bloomington with somebody, a few people a week ago.
Yeah.
I know Paul Miller came down. Scott brought to him and the wife and the kids. We got to see Ethan. I mean, and then there was somebody else. Oh, yeah, it was you and several of the assembly call crew.
Yeah.
Hung out with the good doctor, Dr. Clavio, and
Kathy.
Kathy was, we definitely, loved spending time with Kathy. Megan was around.
Yeah.
Keep going down the list. Tony, we had Tony,
of course,
and Jess, and I mean, really, we and then you actually got back into Philly,
but the skin of my teeth,
by the skin of your teeth.
Yeah, our flight, my flight coming back from Indiana got delayed because our flight was expected to land about an hour and a half, 2 hours before kickoff of the Super Bowl in Philadelphia, and it was delayed 2 hours. So, as you can imagine, all the Philly fans that were on the flight, about 60% of them wearing Eagles gear, were none too pleased about the delay. So, but luckily we did get back, and I mean, we literally walked in to the Concourse B at the Philly airport just as that pick six was being run back by the Eagles. So, I mean, the place was exploding. We're coming off as like trying to figure out what's going on. But it was great. It was, the airport staff were like hanging out and high-fiving the passengers as they're coming off the plane. So it's a great little, slice of Philadelphia right there, just as we got back.
That's really, I actually am thrilled for the Philadelphia sports fans, and I'm also really thrilled for you with your property values every time the Eagles or the Phillies or the Sixers, Flyers, any of them win.
Yeah.
Because I just feel like you buy yourself a couple more years before the inevitable sports riot that burns the city to the ground.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you're not in the city, you're pretty safe in terms of, the post championship celebrations. So you get through that 12 hours, then you're in the clear.
You're in the clear. Okay, good. And you're close to Valley Forge, which was actually the setup as the fail-safe point, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the national fail-safe point back in the 1700s. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you really think about it, you're probably in much better shape. I just always want to make sure that you guys are okay out there because I never know, every time I see a battery, I think of you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. But the good thing is, during the Back Home Network meetup, it was great seeing everyone was healthy and safe, and luckily no trips to the Monroe County lockup as expected. So Tom Sony's bail fund will just roll over to next year, I'm assuming.
We properly invested at 4%. We might be okay with that. That way it covers other expenses potentially, including legal fees. Yeah. And it was good. Actually, it was nice meeting Austin Render and his wife, who we found out was a cheerleader for Southside when I, who would have known me as who's the fat, crazy ball coach for the Parkside team, So it was awesome hearing that, awesome seeing that. Rented a few former players as well over the weekend also, which was really cool. And
that was funny. At least two players approached you, right?
Yeah, we had, I mean, and really, again, all the fans, we had people coming up saying, thanks, great job on the show. And we really appreciate hearing that.
Yeah.
And getting your feedback and also your opinions too, because believe it or not, when you guys talk to us about some of this stuff, it actually goes, oh, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
We need to look at exploring that a little more in depth. We need to look at trying to figure out, okay, what you guys are saying out there and what you're thinking and what you're wanting has an impact for us, because this conversation really, as you know, is between Mike and you, but in reality, you're having it too with us right now, and we know that. So we want your feedback, is what we're saying.
Yeah. Exactly. We should also thank our pal Brad Brosmer for his hospitality.
Huge thank you. Yes, very much so. Brad, we really, and anytime we get a chance to hang out with Brad or some of him and just kind of talk shop, it's fun, fun stuff.
And Galen especially.
Yeah.
Whenever was it the tap room we go to, or the tap?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I always say when Galen sits down in that back corner room at the tap, I think it instantly becomes like the Bloomington version of the Agora of ancient Greece. Just it's the public space that people come to hear the drippings of wisdom from a great philosopher.
I was thinking there's definitely the trial and death of Socrates vibe to the whole feel, usually.
I mean, where else you go do you get that wisdom on basketball, good Bloomington food and yacht rock?
Don't Steely Dan. I mean, he put me down a rabbit hole and I loved it. I was like, man. And then my wife goes, I can't do this anymore. You got to shut this off. Okay, fine. We'll find something else for a couple days. So around the same time, again, right before you flew in, the other Mike, the guy by Mike Woodson, he, not the other Mike, but it just sounded funny when I said it in my own head. And I should say another Mike decided to, let's just put it this way. The future, basically the world changes on St. Patrick's Day, if not before, but there will be a change in management at the Indiana University basketball program coming up here in the next, month or so.
Yeah.
And we're now in the throes of the papal conclave known as a coaching search, which at IU is something akin to if you put the Vatican in the cuckoo's nest and gave the AD the job of Nurse Ratched. It gets a little bonkers out there.
Without the Adderall, unfortunately. So
far from the Adderall.
More like uppers.
So a lot of uppers, and the flight trackers are rolling, and the speculation is going, and we're all on the vortex at Kings Island going up and down. Any advice, Mike, for the average person to get through another coaching search? We should be pretty good at it. We do this a lot. And I think Trilly would even say it best. We take the cake.
Yeah. IU fans, definitely. Yeah. People will, I got a few texts and messages this week, and they're asking, what's going on? What's happening like right now? And it's always good to, have that kind of interaction, I guess. But it's funny, as the years have gone by, and even though I do research this stuff, and pay attention to it, I tend to not follow it like minute by minute anymore. It's just, there's just too much going on that's not actually going on. And my bit of advice is that when you look back on all coaching hires, you notice that you are smartest towards the end of the search, not at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
And so if you think about how should you be spending your time and investing it during coaching search? I would say more later on versus the beginning. The beginning is just good to take in information and just kind of okay, we're hearing this is being said, but don't take everything as gospel, because there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening and you're just kind of in the dark. And like I said, it's a little bit like Schrodinger's cat. There's the box. You don't know what's happening inside the box, and you're just having to wait until the box is opened some weeks later to find out, okay, yep, this coaching option was truly alive, or it was never going to happen.
But I would never fault somebody for putting their ear to the box and hoping they hear the cat scratching.
Exactly. Yeah. And doing it just every few hours, just check in and say, hey, what's going on Pigs or Inside the Hall, Trilly, wherever you decide to get your information. But just, I think if you're hitting refresh like every 2 minutes. That is a bit like the equivalent of like when we were kids, we would jump in the van, drive down to Florida. And if you're not even in Evansville yet and you're asking, are we there yet? Then yeah, you're probably going to be in for some frustration along the way.
And I think the other thing that, yeah, again, kind of bearing in mind that we are at Evansville, although we may be going to the regional airport, and I think that that's where some of the excitement came from at this point.
Right.
Just know that I think my thing on some of this was, and I remember years ago in a coaching search where I would have potentially had some information. I found out with the rest of the planet, even sitting on the faculty athletics committee.
Right.
And for the most part, there's Scott Dolson. There are coaching candidates. There are the coaching candidates' agents and families. There may be a few people here and there that may pick up pieces. There may be a way to kind of piece together where things are at that moment. But if you're hearing the board of trustees is all on private jets flying to a secure location, don't believe it. There are certain things in play that influence what could or could not be happening.
Right.
And at this point, like, just also realize that, conversations, verbal agreements, contracts, whatever, it becomes pretty obvious when the thing tips where it's going.
Yeah.
Really obvious, really fast. And then, then there's the announcement and everything else. But I would just say that, have fun. This is always a good time. Let me rephrase this. Yeah, it's always at least a little exhilarating. But the thing is, we've gotten really good at this whole thing with coaching searches, recruiting battles, all these things. Yeah. We're really kind of good at that. And at that point, let's kind of just realize that we're still there, and that we also because we have all this support, obviously you can express that support in other ways. And one of the best ways to do that is home field apparel. Tournaments coming, as you're kind of looking at, checking out the site at this point, realizing those teams that you may see that look like they're going to be making it, picking up that t-shirt to wear to kind of show off to your coworker, say, I knew about this team first, or just looking at your alternative teams to, see what that is, or coming into that area, if you want to, give that special someone or that person in your family for who's got a birthday or anniversary coming up, a shirt for their alma mater to be able to wear out to the local Bennigans or Houlihan's or wherever. Just made that one up again.
1989.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it had a really good Monte Cristo. You go there, when you go out there to kind of watch the game, that way they at least, can kind of have a unique look and a unique style for them. For multiple institutions. And also remember that when upsets start happening, home field is really good about getting something out quick.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, that if you want that, again, or if you want to troll your Purdue friends with a Fairleigh Dickinson shirt, they've got those there.
Yeah. Yeah. Owing to your devotion to antiquity, Bob, besides Bennigan's, I did note that you had sent pictures of your Elite Corso 3-stripe crew neck sweater that came. Was it like 2 weeks ago? Like, I know it was before the meetup.
I wore it on Saturday. So I wore one that looked like it on Friday. Wore that one on Saturday. I don't know. My heavy. Yeah, but yeah, it's comfy. I wore it last night also.
My favorite thing about that is that if you notice on social media, everyone like within the IU universe was posting their pics of that Lee Corso sweater on the same day.
Same day.
Yeah, I mean, it was like the old cartoons. Like the home field stork had flown across the state, just dropping its bundle on everyone's doorstep at the same time, and everyone taking to Twitter saying, "It's here, I got it."
I'll just say there was a 53-foot trailer sometime in the 80s when the G.I. Joe Sky Striker came out. Man, this is 2 shows, 2 G.I. Joe references.
Yeah.
2 out of 3. So nobody had the dang thing because it was sold out. We all had rain checks from Target. And on one day, the 53-foot trailer showed up and everybody got their Sky Striker on the same day. It was like it was like some sort of massive so same feeling with the Lee Corso. Same feeling.
Yep. Awesome. So be sure to check out all the latest retro gear at homefieldapparel.com. So coming up on segment 1, we'll start at the beginning, the 3-point line. It started as a gimmick, but it did kick off a revolution in the game of basketball. Coming up next.
And welcome back to X's and Joe's. When we were talking about this basketball season and going into a couple modern basketball things that are kind of happening currently, and looking at where the game is moving as we went through the 2024-2025 college basketball year, one of the things that kind of jumped out as we were looking at early season results was that it seemed like there's another uptick in 3-point frequency and more conversation, and really the national conversation, especially in the NBA, over utilization of the 3-point shot versus other ways of scoring the basketball. And a big part of that, I think, is just as time has gone on and we figure, I think we want to kind of dive into how that's happened versus, is it good or bad?
Yeah. There's also the local conversation.
There's a pretty big local conversation that we've been having for
what's the 3-word phrase we hear everywhere? We need shooters. That is that and that is really kind of the conversation. You're right, the conversation point we'll be going back to, which is across the game, it was this whole thing where, and I have a critique on some of the talent evaluation that I felt like for way too long, they being certain, the talent evaluation sphere, right,
valued playmaking over shot making, and power size over finesse size.
Right.
I do believe that since Grady Dick, I do believe since Reed Shepherd, I think Bray Mullins kind of fit this as well this year.
Yeah.
That they're beginning to there's an evolution in talent evaluation to look at shooters or shot making ability differently than playmaking ability.
Right.
I also think that there's some unique issues in the American game. We're going to get to that really more or less in the second segment. Yeah. But there's some issues in the American game that actually overemphasize getting the ball to the lane and trying to do something with it versus getting the ball into a place to your spots as a shooter.
Right.
Is it improving? Yes. I think personal trainers are doing a wonderful job of trying to get that moving as well. But there's a whole reason and a whole logic behind all this. And I think it starts with why, kind of how this line even developed. Because when we kind of go back and evaluate what the line became, I think it was one of those issues where, and Wikipedia has a great entry on this on the history of the 3-point shooting. If you want a good overview, it's really very, very, very enlightening. I'll put it that way. And you can kind of go back through the sources and kind of read some of these, but it was actually Ray Meyer and I think Abe, Goldstein or whoever the guy with
Abe Saperstein.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. I think those were the guys who basically, they started what was called the ABL back in the early 60s, back in the kind of cowboy days of professional basketball, and even to a certain degree professional football, where they were looking for some sort of gimmick or some, as Lee put it, we needed a home run. And so they just arbitrarily decided 25 feet. They had a couple little experiments with some games, some games in the past, but because remember that the rules of basketball have evolved greatly since Naismith's original rules.
I think in the 1950s there were 2 college games, like one in 54 and 158, that actually had like a 3-point line. They just did for like one game. Like in 58, I think it was like Siena versus like Hofstra or something like that. So
there was a Fordham game too that was in there as well. So there were a couple of these where they were just kind of playing around. And it's kind of like right now what we're doing with the Elam Ending. There could be some very similar areas where it's like, okay, let's test this thing out and see how this works.
Yeah.
And they were changing the dimensions of the court because they were realizing pretty quickly that the court dimensions were being exploited very effectively, and particularly space inside.
Yeah.
That and especially as players got more athletic, as you started getting the Russells, the Chamberlains, those guys playing. George Mikan is another example of this.
Yeah. Well, it changed the lane dimensions based upon his performance.
Yeah. And then going to the current amateur lane, and then now the NBA lane, which is used in the international game.
Yeah.
So the 3-point line in particular was set at 25 feet. When the ABA started, the ABL fails.
Yeah.
Ray Meyer, who was involved with it, all that kind of evolves into the American Basketball Association, which is when you start talking about the birth of the Indiana Pacers, San Antonio Spurs. Denver was part of that also, I believe. Yeah. The Nuggets, the Kentucky Colonels,
Virginia Squires. Yeah.
Right. All the, and again, you can look at a Will Ferrell movie, Semi-Pro. and
I saw a Flint Tropics jersey out in Philly the other day. So,
which is,
if
you know, you know,
the cultural penetration of that movie has not waned.
No, it hasn't. And it's one of those deals where it's like you talk about the modern NBA, and you being from Philly, the ABA was pretty vital because you got a pretty good ball player from the ABA that became a legend there.
Yeah.
But they put a 25-foot 3-point line in that as well.
Yeah.
And when you start looking at guys like Bobby Slick Leonard coaching the Pacers, it becomes kind of a weapon for teams out of Indiana, out of Kentucky, those sorts of programs.
Well, I think about like the state of Indiana. The two top all-time leaders in the ABA 3-point makes, where they're from.
When I say Indiana, when I say Jimmy Rail, and wasn't Jimmy Rail?
No.
Did he play in the NBA? Was Rick Mount in the NBA?
Rick Mount played in the ABA. Yes, he played for the Pacers for one time. But no,
he did.
Two Hoosiers are at the top of
and they
the ABA.
They aren't those two guys, is what you're telling me.
Not those two guys, no.
Go for it.
It'd be Louis Dampier and Billy Keller.
I was going to say
Keller was from George Washington High School, and played for the Pacers,
was.
And Dampier was Southport High School, and played for the Kentucky Colonels. So
we know,
anybody
that
from Southport that's worth.
I met a guy. He's pretty good at I've heard he's a pretty good shooter, and he's actually pretty good at like teaching children how to shoot, much like I am. But but no, in all seriousness, that was I forgot about Louis Dampier. Did he end up was he at University of Kentucky also?
Yeah,
I can't remember. Okay, he went to Kentucky, and Keller was at Purdue.
Yeah.
So you go into the building of the 25 line, the foot line, and when the ABA and NBA merged, and at this point, remember the NBA was not exactly on great visual or financial footing in the late 70s, early late 70s. They needed something to kind of spice the game up. So then they created the 23-foot 9-inch 3-point line. They put that in going into the 80 season. Coincidentally, the rookie seasons of when Larry Bird and Urban Magic Johnson.
Yeah. The first make was a Celtic, but do you remember who made it?
Chris Ford.
Exactly, Chris Ford. Yeah.
Who eventually ended up coaching the Celtics and running it right square into the ground. And I believe who replaced him, and maybe even Rick Pitino. It was around that same timeline that Rick Pitino was. Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny if you look back at the statistics, just comparing the utilization. In the first year of the 1980, when the NBA had the 3-point line, the Celtics shot in 1985 3-pointers a game. Now they're shooting 48 a game.
And the Celtics were high compared to a lot of teams. I mean,
there's some teams out west that shot more, but
not many.
With Bird on the team and Ford and some, they shot a decent number, but some teams barely shot it at all.
Well, and they were still running spacing schemes where, again, even because you have the expanded lane in the NBA, but you still had 2-3 guys in the paint moving around. You still kind of used a small forward, power forward, center concept where they were seen as interior versus exterior players. Dribble penetration was not what it is, not even in the ballpark of what it is today. I mean, that comes, Dr. J starts it with from like a just attacking the lane standpoint. But Michael Jordan eventually, when he jumps into the game and really kind of changes how ball handling is. Yeah. All this is happening in the 80s. And at the same time, the international game adopts one in 1984, which Bob Knight, why does Steve Alford make the 84 Olympic team? because Bob Knight needed a zone buster, and he knew Steve Alford could be that because of his quick release, he could be that guy.
It was because of his defense.
Definitely not because of his defense, but he also had a pretty good defensive unit on that group, so they could definitely help off of him. They kind of knew what they were doing.
Yeah, Jordan and Wiemuth are not bad.
Back to Jordan. It's like, he'll be okay. Wayman Tisdale, hell, he was good too. I mean, he was amazing at that.
Yeah.
So then you go. So while that's all happening in the early 80s, where the NBA adopts in 80 and then the international in 84, the college game experiments with it at 19 feet. You'll see different like footage of some older games, or you'll see a 3-point line inside.
The 1983 line. Yeah.
Yeah, the 83 line.
That 1 year in 83 where they put it actually inside the top of the key.
Whitman and Kitchell basically win a Big Ten title because of it. Whitman
shot 44% from that line, and Kitchell 65% because it's basically a free throw for those guys.
What was
the dimensions? I think it was it 17 feet 9 inches? I think was the.
It might have been 17 feet 9 inches. It was.
So.
I mean,
yeah.
And because again, if you watch basketball from that era, a lot of it was played. A lot of offense was played free throw line extended low.
Right.
That a lot of it was you didn't really see a whole lot of offense being run above the free throw line extended.
Right.
And when you start thinking about why the line was put in place, and this was exactly why college basketball, and then eventually, high school amateur ball, basically younger, and if NFAHS, whatever, the federal, the governing body for high school basketball that then leaks down all the way to, little kids. They needed more space to maneuver, because when you start looking at 3 guys in the lane at 1980s bodies with the athleticism, the game was congested. The game was clogged. They needed to make a change. So here comes the 3-point line to kind of expand out, which actually creates almost a reference point on the court. Like if you're coaching at any level, that is an offensive reference point, because the other one is, and that's when you like see box offenses in particular, where you put 2 on the elbow, 2 on the blocks, and let's just try and pop out of it some way.
Yeah.
Those types of, now you have a place where you can actually effectively tell a kid, this is where we want you to be. A lot of coaches will call the 3-point line the drive line.
Yeah.
And the college game really wanted to, it wasn't just about getting the extra point for a longer shot. It was also, how do we incentivize people to create more spacing?
Yeah. You remember the two players I know that some have always blamed for the 3-point line being incepted in college basketball were Ralph Sampson and Patrick Ewing.
Oh yeah,
you were like those Virginia and Georgetown teams. I mean, if you took those guys and put them in like today's game, they'd still be obviously dominant. But back then, before the 3-point line, I mean, with all the offense, like you said, Bob, is kind of like getting sort of sucked into the lane. Those guys patrolling the lane just made offense so difficult to function, and it kind of took miracles for teams to actually knock those Virginia and Georgetown teams off.
Well, and then there's also no incentivization to actually put pressure man, other than to try to come back, or those sorts of to try to come back against teams. You're packing the lane, packing that lower quadrant of the court. Zone defense is picking up on the elbows. Okay, fine. They want to shoot it for 22 feet. Let them shoot it. Now if there's a kid like you had that Jimmy Rail type or the Steve Alford type who can hit that shot, maybe you're going to come out on him a little bit.
Yeah,
but really there was no place for the ball to go. So you had to expand the utilization of the court basically back towards the half court line. It became necessary. Yeah. Because again, players like you just mentioned with both Sampson and Ewing, systems being like 5-Sigma Majama was a lot of fun to watch, but at the same time, I mean, they were basically doing it. It was almost like power football in so many respects.
Right. Yeah. They're always on rim attack.
And you'll notice that after the line was adopted, Houston, Louisville, Georgetown, you started seeing those programs that were power basketball type teams go into almost a hibernation until they figure it out. Denny Crum and John Thompson.
Like Duke kind of came around and started dominating.
Right. Dural penetration. Carolina figured it out. Indiana, in many respects, figured it out, especially early in the Indiana, early in the system or early in this new system. But you kind of go into the fact that the line was kind of put there. Bob Knight never liked it. He always wanted to go a trapezoidal key first or the extended NBA lane. He mentioned that a few times. That's what they used in the international game was a trapezoidal. But
it's ironic, obviously, that Knight was the first, I guess, key recipient of a national championship off of the 3-point line. Mainly because people for going 7 for 10 in the championship game.
Exactly. And I mean, that whole season using it, and then those first few years where they would actually utilize the line effectively, as a key weapon.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to go ahead and put the first slide up because that actually kind of helps us there a little bit, kind of define this. Yeah. So we jump forward to the 2000s and we start noticing that teams began utilizing the 3-point shot more over the decade. So we have here I put up a little graph here. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it. If not, it's in the show notes, as well all of our graphs and charts. In the 2000s, you had basically teams that shot the 3-point shot. The median level was less than a third of the shots. And over the course of the century, the last 25 or so years, you've seen a steady climb in the median frequency.
Yeah.
Where now it's less than a third. Now this season, this is one reason why we're having the conversation now. You've seen another uptick up to almost 40% of shots, of field goal attempts being taken in college basketball, Division I college basketball, with a 3-point shot.
Right.
You always have kind of high frequency teams, kind of like, call them almost like Grinnell type teams that are running at that 50% plus.
Oh yeah.
That's been a constant.
Or Loyola Marymount teams.
Loyola Marymount teams would be another good example.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have stats from 87. But I'm sure Providence shot a very high percentage.
Yeah.
In 87. Kentucky definitely did in the 90s.
Patino's Kentucky teams, yeah.
And you also, and we'll get to kind of why this is later with better shooters and that more guys with more range. We can get into that. But but you've also noticed there's a lower frequency as well that's actually gone up over 20%. And if you go back to the early parts of the century, and I'm going to give Mike a quiz here. Actually, we talked about this off. Mike, tell the listeners in 2000, who was that team that had the lowest frequency of 3-point attempts versus field goal attempts in the year 2000?
Bob Knight in Indiana.
Winner, chicken dinner. Yes, Bob Knight in Indiana in 2000.
Even with A.J. Guyton on the team.
A.J. Guyton, Michael Lewis, keep going down the list. We had some other guys that could hit. Luke Jimenez was on that team too. He could drill that thing.
Yeah, Fife was on the team, but he wasn't taking a lot of threes then. So
he also, because he wasn't hitting a lot of threes up until that senior year, where he all of a sudden just Kyle Hornsby was on that team. I mean, Tom Coverdale, who didn't play much, but you kind of go down the list and you start noticing it's like, okay, so in 2000. Part of it is, I think, and we'll talk about this more with spacing the floor better. We'll get more segment 2 stuff to please remind me to talk about, Mike, if I skip over it or forget it. Yeah. What it really comes down to, motion coaches, I think, struggled with that shot in many respects because a lot of it was trying to use passing penetration to attack the lane.
Yeah.
To try to get free throws. And I think that, I mean, we didn't really run numbers on free throw attempts versus field goal attempts, but that could be part of the question also, which is, there's a little bit of concern that if you're shooting the 3 ball, you're not exactly putting pressure on a defense as much. You're not going
to draw a lot of fouls.
Right. That's where I'm going with that. Yeah. So that lowest frequency in 2000. Now, funny, in 2013, we see there's a massive drop to like 10%. And Mike, can you tell the listeners who coached that team and where he coached them?
Is that Pat Knight?
Yes, at Lamar when he had that 4-20-something season. We have not looked at his numbers from Marion, but that was Pat Knight shooting it, with this really strange crevice down to 2013. I'm saying that because I think for some of us culturally, we have this mythology that we always want to, that shooting the basketball, the we need shooters concept. When you start thinking about the coaches that we've kind of put the we need shooter, like Marty Simmons was also one of those coaches at Evansville that was in the 2010s, 2011 when he was there. Yeah. He would lead the country in the fewest attempts. Right. Not just now. There is something to be said for that. That it's like, well, it's not like we're running. Now maybe it is that thing of, well, they don't run and gun, coach. I agree, but it's also a thing where the frequency is kind of a question because it kind of shows where the game is evolving to, which is, more space, more utilization for multiple players on the perimeter. It may also explain when you start seeing some of the night disciples, and Simmons is kind of a night cruise disciple.
Right.
When you start seeing some of these, as heck, even Alford, when he was at UCLA, wasn't exactly shooting threes at a high clip those first 3 seasons he was there.
Yeah.
You start noticing that. Now, one other thing I want to notice is we put this on there as a reference point. They did move the line further out from 19 feet 9 inches, which is the high school, the under 18 line.
Yeah.
They moved that out to in 2029. So you saw some drops in frequency, as well as in 2020 when they moved it to I think what's now the international line.
Yeah, that's the FIBA line at 22,175. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you'll see some differences, but so maybe some dips, especially as you go to the next slide, which shows 3-point efficacy.
Yeah.
And the best shooting team, what you've noticed is going from 2000 at 45% with that 19-foot line. Now it's just over 40%. The median line has stayed remarkably close, 35 to 34%.
Yeah.
And that worst shooting team has stayed remarkably close, over 20%. So everyone's at least hitting the dang thing at 20% or better. So that's probably your floor. Anywhere between 20 and 40% is kind of where all 362 teams, 363 teams are sitting.
Yeah.
And to put that in game numbers real quick, not the makes, but attempts. So if you think on a 67 possession game, which is roughly the median in college basketball this year, and then you take out you add offensive rebounds, but you offset offensive rebounds and turnovers, and you kind of look at that statistic, and then you look at the number of field goals taken. If your attempts are you're looking at about 56 actual shots over the course of a game.
Mm-hmm.
With that, if you're a high team, that means you're shooting. If they're on a 56 shot game, you're shooting 31 3-pointers out of that 56, which still means that you're shooting 25 twos. Mm-hmm. 22 if you're the median in that 30 to 40% range. 35, 38, 39, 40% range, excuse me. And those low teams are shooting about 12. And ask yourself when you're watching certain teams play, do you see where are you, how many shots when you see those, when they put the graphic up in the middle of the game, field goals this half, and you see 4 and the other team shooting 12, that gives you an idea of where teams are when they're where they are in that game. Yeah. It's also important to note these are aggregated statistics. So some games you're going to have teams that shoot a lot higher. Some teams they shoot a little lower. Yeah. Some days you're at 50. Some days you're at 25. It just depends on what the defense is giving you, how you're dealing with the scout. Yeah. All of those things. Can you attack the closeouts more effectively off the bounce versus
if you're cold?
Well, but even then, I mean, I would argue. Go ahead.
You notice, it's funny watching the Auburn-Alabama game yesterday. Bama was just really struggling hitting the three. I think they're like 5 for 24 or something towards the end of the game. Sears and all them were just starting to drive at the end. So I think even 3 happy Nate Oates said, "Yeah, I don't think we're just not splashing them tonight, boys. Let's try to get in the lane and get to the foul line."
And that's an adjustment that coaches can definitely make, in those situations, because if you're not hitting it, or you get into the lane and you start scoring there, because a lot of the reason you may be missing is because you have pressure on the perimeter.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you're attacking the lane, and boom, that you have secondary actions going on after if you get that defense in scramble, then you may get that 3-point shot at the correct time. Exactly. I don't know. I'm in the world that if you're 40% shooters and you're cold for 30 minutes, you shoot this thing. Yeah. You still, at some point, the law of averages has to revert back to the mean.
Yeah. You just hope it reverts in that game, not like the next game, which
precisely. And maybe, again, you do it differently, and maybe you look for something differently. I would also say for Nate Oates, it's not like he decided to start relying on 21-foot jump shots all of a sudden either.
Right. Yeah.
So that kind of gives you guys. So really, if you look at, efficacy, you see the best shooting teams have decreased. Median shooting efficacy has stayed the same. Overall, you're high and, you're on the frequency. The median number has gone up about 10 percentage points over the course of the last 25 years, right, which is equivalent to 5 or 6 additional 3s versus 2s on an average game. the floor has risen, and you still have a lot of teams that are shooting. Not a lot of teams, but that top team is usually shooting right at that 50% or plus level.
Yeah.
And there are some impacts when they move the line back. So if they move the line back to the from the FIBA line to the NBA line, that would be something that, and that would be, you can see these kind of quick little dips that teams have with efficacy. So that's interesting to see, like if the median shooting gets up and starts kind of peaking over that 35% number, you may start hearing conversation of maybe it's time we move the line to the NBA line.
Yeah. Yeah, that's coming. Yeah.
Perhaps.
That's going to happen before we get the 11-foot rim, but yeah, there's
I remember the 11-foot rim. They're dunking too much. People are having too much fun.
Exactly.
We need to get the game so they can take layups and not slam dunks. Dunks are too easy.
Yeah.
Here we go.
You want to make the game even that much easier for Wembanyama and those guys that, okay, an extra foot, no big deal to me, but those guys are not going to be able to dunk now. So,
right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's interesting seeing the aggregated numbers and sort of like the trends, how they've kind of come about, especially since, when the line first came into college, you had teams all over the place in terms of like the elite teams. I mean, you had like Loyola Marymount that was shooting, there's some games where it looked like they were shooting like 40, 50 threes a game just because they're getting that many shots up.
Right.
And then on the other end, yeah, you're right. You had some championship teams that are just not shooting much at all. So we wanted to take a look at some of the more elite teams and see like how, at least in the recent years. What's that?
I forgot to mention one little thing. I put a little yellow arrow down there.
Okay.
In 2016, that was when they moved from 35 seconds to 30 seconds on the shot clock.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I wanted to look at that real quick and see that it really didn't have too much of an impact, I don't think, overall on 3-point shooting. So because again, you think, well, maybe you're rushing your offense a little more because you're in the 30-second versus the 35-second shot clock.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, sorry, Mike, go ahead. I totally cut you off there.
That's a good point, though. I think that definitely has a good influence on pace, but particularly, and overall shot attempts, just because there's just less time to take them. So
right.
But yeah. So the question I know we get a lot about 3-point shooting is about, okay, well, what's the right amount to take? If you want to be a winning team, do you take a lot? Do you take few? Do you try to be at the middle? So we're trying to answer these questions. It's always good to take a peek at the teams that are actually winning championships and see what their numbers look like. So I put together the last 10 champions in the NCAA, and just to see what frequency were they having, both in terms of the number of attempts they had, but also what their make percentage is. As you can see, going down, this goes from 2024 to 2014. And the 3-point attempts, this is the percentile ranking. So this is not the percentages that they're shooting. This is actually just the percentile of where they fit within all of college basketball, all in Division I. So obviously, the higher the percentile, the further up in terms of the ranking they are towards the top, basically. So in this case, if you look at it, there's actually some decent amount of diversity here in the attempts, or at least the rate of attempts. So you see UConn, Baylor, Villanova, these are all teams that are on the top 70th percentile or higher in terms of their attempts. Also, at the same time, you have some teams that are on the low end, that are on below the 30th percentile. So that would be like the 2022 Kansas team, the Virginia team in 2019, and 2017 North Carolina team. So, and we see this when you look at the numbers, like even just in any given year, you go on the KenPom top 25, and you'll see the same thing. There's not necessarily a minimum number of threes you have to take to be a good team. Like this year, you see teams like Michigan State, Iowa State, Houston, St. John's, St. Mary's. These are all low volume 3-point shooting teams that are in the top 25 in Ken Palm. Well, the flip side, obviously, you do have the Alabamas, the Illinois, Wisconsin, strangely, this year is like towards the top in terms of 3 attempts. Louisville now and Marquette are way up there as well in the top 20, I think. So, yeah, you have a degree of diversity in terms
Kentucky. Kentucky's another one Kentucky is a big one this year too. That with Mark Pope, they're really shooting at a very high rate.
Yeah, and Florida is up there too, and surprisingly, Duke and Auburn are both up there in terms of in makes, surprisingly, or in terms of attempts. Sorry. So you have a degree of diversity, and again, when it comes to championship teams, you have to be elite at something. You don't necessarily have to be elite at chucking a lot of 3-pointers. But I would say with the teams that are low volume in 3, the problem you run into is that when you're in the NCAA tournament, you have to be able to get into shootouts with teams and actually win the game. And sometimes you're going to be running into teams that shoot a lot of threes and make a lot of threes. And so for those teams, in order to sort of counterbalance the math, let's say in terms of the final outcome, you better be winning somewhere else. And so if you think about like the Virginia team, they were number 1 defense in the country. That North Carolina team, they were number 1 offensive rebounding team in the country. So you have to be able to sort of like counterbalance some of the advantages that those teams that chuck a lot of threes are able to do in terms of making it through and surviving the 6-game tournament. So that's on the attempt side.
I would like to add real quick, just to put this in perspective and framing.
Sure.
KU in 2022 took a third of their 3-point shots from, took a third of their field goals as 3-point shots.
Mm-hmm.
2017, North Carolina had 30%. So that's Kansas, even though their percentile ranking is lower, we're actually taking more threes based on where college basketball was 5 years later after Carolina was at their 30% thing. And that's, it just helps us kind of frame the conversation that sometimes, and the ranking really kind of tells you not just where teams are, but also where the game is at that moment.
Right, exactly. It's the relativity that kind of matters, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But it's just one of those things where it's like, boy, Kansas wasn't shooting it very often. I can see where someone would think that, but that's still a third of their shots they're taking from 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, yeah. Michigan State's is right at 30% this year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think Michigan State's they're number 318th, I think, in the country in attempts.
And their efficacy is not much better. So I'm just thinking it's a creative way for them to get the ball inside. I think it's like, we can't penetrate it, might as well chuck it so we can get a real offensive rebound.
Yeah, they're 357th in make percentage. So literally they're like 5 teams worse than them in terms of the actual 3-point percentage. So not ideal.
This one to me is really interesting.
Yeah. So we saw in the last slide that the number of attempts really don't matter. But when it comes to winning championships, the makes actually do matter. What you see here is that all the championship teams in the last, let's say, 10 years, they're all above the 50th percentile in terms of their 3-point percentage. And the majority of them are at least up into the 70th, 80th percentile, but some of them like right at the top. I see the Baylor team in 2021. I guess I'll have to put another $5 in the Baylor jar for Jared, since I'm on a strict limit on the number of times I can mention that Baylor national championship team on the network. It's
literally worth every penny. They're kind of they may be the actual X's and Joes. This is how you do it.
Exactly.
This is how you do it.
Yeah.
If you want to look at a team that was done beautifully, perfectly, Baylor is our grand champion. We have a reserve champion. That's the Villanova teams. UConn. We have our favorites around here. Yeah.
You're right, Bob. We do have to have some model to say this is what it looks like, or this is how it should look like. So, Yeah. So so on the makes also, so you had Baylor, which was a high volume, high percentage maker. They were literally the number one 3-point shooting team in that year. And yeah, they had 4 guys above 40%. So you had Mitchell, Flagler, Butler, and Teague were all like 40 plus, which is crazy, especially when they're all on the floor at the same time, spreading your offense, out and forcing the defense to be completely like strung out and trying to guard guys that can not only shoot but can drive right by you at the same time. And the interesting one, and there's the Virginia one. Now you think about it, we showed in the last slide, Virginia was a low volume 3-point shooting team, but they were top 5 in the country in terms of their makes. Because you think about it, I mean, they obviously had good shooters. You had Kyle Guy was at 43%, Hunter was at 44, and I think Jerome was right around 39, 40%.
Right.
And so you take a team that has really good shooters, and then you add on the fact that they're also the number 1 defense in the country. You probably don't have to give a lot of shots. You're going to just out efficient teams, over the course of the 6-game tournament. And you think about that was the one Virginia team that Tony Bennett had that could get into shootouts with teams. They kind of outlasted that Purdue team which was scoring like 80 points a game with Carson Edwards and Ryan Klein and all them. They eked out that Auburn team that was also scoring at a high level. The prior Tony Bennett teams and the ones that came after just didn't have that kind of firepower to stay up with teams to make the run all the way to the championship. So that was a very unique Virginia team in terms of how they were composed in terms of their roster. And also, if you look at the Villanova teams are kind of, I guess, reasonably the same. I mean, the one in 2018 was probably the one that stands out in terms of 3-point makes. They had, I guess they had Bridges, Brunson, and DiVincenzo all over 40%. But also what made them kind of weird is that their center, Spellman, was at 43%. He was like, stepping back and chucking threes. And that's the thing you kind of notice a lot of times when you look at these numbers is that people will think that if they see some big variation in a 3-point percentage, within a team or just overall, there's a tendency to assume, okay, it just must be the guards are chucking a lot more threes. It's not always the case. The margin oftentimes comes in the fact that the centers and power forwards are now chucking more threes. And that was definitely the case with that Villanova team because Spellman was just launching and hitting at a pretty decent rate.
Well, again, more when we get back when we go to segment 2. But I really think that that's an important thing where you're looking at if you have 4.5 guys that can shoot the 3 ball, you're going to win a lot of basketball games because it's really hard for defenses to adjust to you.
Right.
You want the piece of the puzzle that becomes essential. Get a 5 guy that can shoot a 3-point shot. Right. Because now you've literally you cannot keep rim protection in the paint if you have a 6'9", 6'10", 6'11" guy that can hit 40% of the time from 3.
Right. Yeah, but especially with all the offenses are now like being geared towards completely vacating the lane, 5 out, 4 out.
Even 4 out with the guy on the weak side short corner, thing. But that's it. It's really that sort of what you just talked about there is pretty essential. And I think it's also important to kind of realize that, like we look at Carolina being the low number there. And remember, they had a really good 3-point shooting game against one particular team in that 2017 title run.
Yeah, that was an outlier.
Freakishly good. Freakishly. I mean, but we've always talked about that Carolina team, and we'll just briefly say again, they were kind of that weird unicorn in all these teams that they were the ones that basically played 3 bigs, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. But their bigs were pretty, adaptable.
Versatile.
Could kind of move out a little bit, especially Jackson.
Right.
So, yeah.
And also could defend well at those levels, too. They had controlled the boards on both ends very effectively. I mean, there's a lot. But that was kind of that sort of – they were kind of the unicorn out of this whole era that we're talking about. Yeah,
that Marcus Page night in Philadelphia will never be forgotten by IU fans.
Just exploded.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of like an overview of the championship level teams, and again, it's obviously you kind of look at this and it's clear that they have shooters, but it's also the thing you also have to remember is that it's like all the players on the team are creating these spaces and openings. Because you look at, like even like that first 2014 UConn team, as much as like they had really great shooters on that team, it helped that you had Shabazz Napier just opening things up for everybody. So
Right.
so it's good to remember it is the shooters, but it's also the drivers too.
And also having some post presence to help out as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So take a look and see, like, in the case for Indiana, like, okay, well, how does IU like match up in terms of these kind of the changes in numbers over time since let's say the last like decade and a half. In terms of 3-point attempts, and this should come as no shock to IU fans, you had a pretty decent high of the rankings for 3-point attempts during the Tom Crean era. It actually spiked up to like the 90th percentile around like 2015, 2016, sort of the height of the Yogi Ferrell years. And then starting in 2018, IU's consistently been in, let's say, the bottom quartile of college basketball, consistently below, let's say, 25, 20, 15 percentile in terms of D1 teams on their attempts. I think, 2000. It was in 2023, 2024. IU was like literally at the bottom. There's only just a handful of college basketball teams that are attempting less threes than IU in those years.
And 2023 was a 4-seed year, just for everyone's reference point.
Yeah, exactly. If you so we look at that in terms of the attempts, but then just contrasting the makes. IU's definitely been pretty jagged in the last, let's say, decade or so. During the Crean years, IU is consistently in, let's say, like the 90th and sometimes 95th percentile. I mean, if you look at 2012, 2013, 2015, and 2016, IU's like in the top like 95th percentile in all of college basketball in makes.
It should be noted that, if you're watching this, there's this massive drop off 2017 to 2018 in efficacy, right?
Right.
And that was the year that Tom Crean was let go and Archie Miller comes in and takes over. It should also be noted that Archie Miller had Robert Johnson, Colin Hartman. He had some guys that could shoot the 3-ball, right? On that team.
Yep.
And he didn't exactly, once DeRon Davis went down, he didn't exactly have anyone that was a post presence.
Right.
Juwan Morgan, obviously, but Juwan Morgan probably was more of a front-facing guy. It was
even he shot some threes here and there.
He did. Yeah. But I mean, you look at the frequency and then the efficacy rate. It's just that's really, really, really low. When in those situations.
Yeah, I kind of like the spike. The interesting one here in terms of the makes is the spike in 2023. Is that, you're kind of stuck below the 40th percentile since Archie got there. And then this one year, IU spikes up to about like the 85th percentile in 23.
And we just said that was the 4-seed year.
Yep.
And let's give some appreciation and love to one Trey Galloway as well as Miller Kopp.
Yep.
And I think
Hood Schifino kind of
Schifino creating some space and making that happen along with Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson doing some of those. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot to be said there that you get that efficacy in shooting makes a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was it's interesting, like when we run these numbers, we get all those questions like, where do we stack up? How is IU performing? And yeah, it's interesting when you show people the numbers, how I think it shocks people how good IU was at making threes under Tom Crean. Like when you see it like literally that high at top. Because I showed this slide to someone else that was IU fans. Like, oh, I know that they were good shooting teams, but I just didn't realize that they were that good at shooting teams.
Yeah, and I think that kind of explains, because part of it was Crean's system and his approach towards offense that, and I think, Sam Story brings us up when we, those occasions where we talk, that, when you look at, and Dusty May fits this category also to a certain degree. We're gonna get to them in segment 3 briefly, but I think one of the things that, they have high turnovers. If your effective field goal percentage is in the top 10%.
Yeah.
Would you rather have fewer turnovers and more misses, or would you rather have more hits and a couple more turnovers?
Right.
We saw it up close. Would you let Danny Wolf? I mean, do you really want to put constraints on that kid's game?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, I mean, he's gonna thread a few passes that are in too narrow a window, but a lot of the ones when they go through, they're usually going to be makes.
I mean, are you going to would you tell Hank Aaron, you swung really hard, you missed?
Yeah.
Don't swing hard again. Try to make contact, Hank.
Yeah.
No, let the guy swing away, and that's kind of the same mindset here, I think, with the 3-point shooting, and as well as you take, he missed. Remember, 35% 3-point shooter still misses 2 out of 3 shots roughly.
Right.
And that's still a pretty good 3-point shooter. A 40% 3-point shooter still missing more than half. And you look at those aggregated figures over the course of a season. I mean, another percentage point is 1 out of 100.
Mm-hmm.
So that game by game, it makes a bit of a difference. You look at aggregate, it does revert to mean. And, sometimes, like a Devontae Green goes off one game, gets cold the next. Who do you have to replace him in that type of system? And that's, I think, something we're going to kind of talk about a little bit more when we come back here on X's and Joe's. We're going to kind of get into some of the, developmental and systemic conversations around 3-point shooting, as well as, maybe defenses are shifting, and as defenses begin to shift more to trying to take this away, maybe what's an additional counter or two that teams can come up with when we come back on X's and Joe's.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats. So, Bob, we've covered the 3-point shot itself and where and how it all started. Now we can dig into, I guess, how it's evolved in today's game. I guess we should probably start with the players themselves and maybe how they've been developed into the modern game that's so reliant on the 3-point shot. Is that something you're seeing as a coach, even let's say like at the youth level, that the 3-point line is now almost kind of setting sort of like the curriculum in terms of how like players are being like taught the game and how they're being developed into becoming, junior high school and college players?
There was a magic moment sometime, I can't remember, in the mid 2000s, or like the mid aughts, as we would like to say, 06, 07, 08, around that time frame, that you started noticing more and more kids and coaches spacing the floor differently. Like before that, when you're in younger levels, you were seeing guys that were still trying to, they were running a lot of flex and a lot of, pattern movement systems to try to get guys in position. And then you started noticing the game was opening up and then you looked at the other sideline, you realized that the guys coaching against you who are dads looked closer to your age or closer to the guys that you knew as elementary kids when they were in high school, when the line took place.
Yeah.
And so their kids were not nearly as what you would call conservative towards that. And I think from a coaching standpoint, I think American coaching had to evolve very quickly, especially because of the international game, because in 1987, during the Pan American Games, the Brazilian national team walks into Market Square Arena. Oscar Schmidt just lights them up from 3 against a Denny Crum coach team. So here Crum is, defensively doing what he's always done, offensively doing what he's always done. No real valuation on that 3-point line on that squad. And they lose. They got a big lead in the first half, lost it in the second. And like for the U.S. to lose in Indiana in a Pan Am game to a team from Brazil.
Yeah.
And again, look up Oscar Schmidt. we should put him in the show notes.
Yeah.
Because this is exactly who we're talking about. Oscar Schmidt, who may have revolutionized the game on his own in so many ways, never got an NBA, never played a day in the NBA, but really is probably that international player that kind of set the table. And then 1 year later, the Soviets beating the United States in Seoul in that semifinal game, beating a John Thompson led USA team. And I got the theory that the reason why the Soviet Union folded was because they didn't want to lose to gold in basketball because they got us once at it, and they figured we'd bring the NBA in. So in order to preserve their final word in that war, they're going to say, okay, country over. We don't need a country anymore. But they did
all that other economic stuff did, not
no
to the basketball reasons.
nothing to do with Lech Walesa in Poland and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Baltics jumping out. No, had to do with they didn't want to lose another. They didn't want the United States to dominate them with NBA players in the gold medal game in Barcelona.
Yeah,
that being, take that off the table. The Russians beat John Thompson through penetrating kick. Hersey Hawkins, I believe, went down with an injury, so Thompson didn't really have a shooter that could actually replace it, and the United States loses to the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
and the game before that was the '72 game in Munich, where the United States the silver medals are still sitting. I mean, Chris Collins cannot get his dad's silver medal out of Hawk.
Yeah, exactly.
That tells you something. It's like that bitterness is older than us. So, and it deservedly so. I understand why, but that's more the point of. The game was already evolving on the international level, so because international players were training. I mean, you got guys like Drazen Petrovic. You have guys like Dirk Nowitzki,
Arvydas Sabonis.
The original Sabonis.
That's one I remember. Besides Oscar Schmidt, like Sabonis, I remember when he was coming out with. He was from Lithuania, obviously, Soviet Republic. Seeing him at 7'3", just like chucking threes over top of people was like it was absolutely insane.
I mean, you had the Jack Sikma or the Bill Lambier who was shooting 20-footers at that time.
Yeah,
Kelly Tripucka kind of fits in this model. Also, Larry Bird obviously fits in this model.
Yeah,
being a tall kid, but all of those guys, it was kind of a thing of it just felt different because of the way they were doing it.
Right. And if you look at that today, I mean, it's like, when we saw Sabonis do it, like, was it the late 80s, early 90s with the Blazers? It was kind of crazy. And, as the game got more, with just like faster, everyone kind of assumed like, okay, well, that'll be just sort of like a blip on the radar. Mm-hmm. And, things will kind of adapt. But now it seems like things are actually moving more in that direction. I mean, think of how many teams now in the NBA, like high-level teams, their offense is predicated around getting the ball to typically like an overweight, tall dude from like the former Soviet bloc and having him shoot over top of people. I mean, that's almost become like, a staple for some like elite teams. You think about like Joker with the Nuggets. I mean, he was literally the MVP the last few years. Think about Luka. Obviously, he's moving on from Dallas to the Lakers, but I mean, this sort of like dynamic of like, okay, these guys, they can shoot over top of people. They can obviously pass too. That's part of it.
Right. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah. But just
Victor
like,
Wemby.
Yeah.
Wembanyama.
Exactly.
Wemby's a great example of this too. It's like, here we go. It's he can do, or Chet Holmgren. That's why they were calling him the unicorn a few years ago. It was like a couple years back. Was that, that when we talk about modern basketball, it's not just modern guard play, it's really modern big play. That, and American coaches, if you're on the youth level and you have that 5'8" kid, stop putting on the block and running cross screens for him to get him in the post position.
Yeah.
Let me put it to you this way. I'm seeing it now. Guys aren't doing that anymore. I'm seeing 5 out, 4 out, 1 spacing. Yeah. I'm not seeing post hits as much as I used to.
Yeah.
When I'm real, and I've even it's like, guys, you're making me work harder, and I love it.
Yeah.
I love doing that. So, but back to your point though, that was Sabonis was kind of he was the start, what was one of the start players also in that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so hard to stop once they decide that they're going to flash to the rim and they have the balls like with shooter penetrator on the elbow, and you've got like the big guy that's like, flashing down the post. It's like that results in fouls so often against the other team's, big or whoever is like crashing down on them. It's just the offensive efficiency is crazy. And I watched, Joker when the Nuggets won the championship. It was just so like getting down into crunch time. That was just like a standard play. He has it. He'll pass it off to Murray. He cuts down. Murray hits them, on the cut. And it's like, yep, either and one or free throws.
Right. And there's a lot of this that you kind of look at across the board, player development, and looking at players who are able to find their own shot, get their own shot, especially out on the perimeter.
Yep.
Players who are, a lot of them, it's also down to that 0.5 second decision making. That when a player gets the ball, it's Jay Wright. Remember, I used to have a thing: catch, think, act. Take a second, make a decision before you make a decision to do something. And as time has gone on, I'm going more into when you on the catch, make your shot drive decision quick. Yep. And quick is not 1001. It's 1000. And then if you don't have the shot or the drive, then you let something kind of else happen. You kind of let things work a little bit. But that first, you're never more open than when you first catch a basketball, includes not just shooting but driving as well, winning that closeout quickly. Because that's where you're trying to get players to understand that when you get the ball, that's your first chance to strike.
Yeah.
The game has moved in that direction in so many ways that now you have to train players to be able to do that. So now we spend a lot of time on the catch. We spend a lot of time on how you catch a basketball. Get your butt down, hands up, butt down, hands up. Kids will hear me say backside down, hands up. Yeah. I'm trying to say butt too much because some people get offended. It's stupid. I know. They're 12. Who gets? They're making butt jokes all the day. Yeah. But kind of be careful. Step slightly to the ball. Make sure you're aware of where you're on the line. Even if you don't have an active 3-point line where you're coaching, focus on the catch. Focus on catch square shoot, catch 1, 2, 3 count shooting.
Yeah.
Because you watch some teams that are really good at this. It's like the really good 3-point shooting teams. Watch them on the catch.
Yeah.
Watch where their pass placement is. But watch how those guys catch the ball. Are they ready to shoot when they catch it? And do they make a quick, decisive decision?
Yeah. Some of them you notice, like if you watch like upper tier college basketball, even like yesterday, the Auburn Alabama game, which we referenced before, those defenses are so fast that on those catch decisions, the decisions actually being made during the pass. You can see some of those guys, they're literally like stepping, like in the pass is coming, they're like running towards the pass because they know, I've decided I'm going to cut around this, like this ball screen.
Right.
Or I'm just going to just blitz by the guy because I know I'm not going to try to shoot it on this guy. Or if they don't, then that's when they're waiting because they know, okay, I'm not going to be moving because I know I'm going to take the shot right away as soon as I get the ball. Mm-hmm. So you're right. It's the speed at which those decisions have to happen is getting shorter and shorter and literally happening before the ball comes to them because again, the speed and athleticism of the defense is just getting so ridiculous. The windows are so narrow.
And oftentimes it depends after you're right. If you hold it for more, the longer you have the ball static in your hands, the less chance you have of actually making the play yourself.
Yeah.
Without let's say a ball screen or some other sort of assistance from one of your teammates, really it would just be a ball screen in that situation.
Right.
Because I think that, but it also comes down to why you have to space the floor better. And I know as we kind of talk about systemically, how are teams getting these shots? And we've been hinting at it the whole episode that a lot of it depends on, are you able to attack a lane? Are you able to get the ball downhill into a position where you're forcing help and you're forcing defense to come over? And I think about this as I kind of look at some offensive concepts. I want to start looking, and trying to break this down to more simplistic stuff for kids. Where do you go with this? Like, what are your what are outcomes for a screener, for in a ball screen situation? You have a screen, guy screens. You actually have, before the screen is set, you could you could either slip the screen, which means you go. Yeah. Slip the screen, go into the basket, or you ghost screen, which means you basically come out on the perimeter for space to put a big man in space to defend. Yeah. And it actually kind of helps if you can also open the driving lane. Well, we saw Penn State running that brilliantly. When I was in Philly, I was talking to the high school coach who was telling me his offense is based almost exclusively on ghost screens.
Yeah.
Because what it does is you don't even have to make contact. It's kind of like Jay Wright's interchange on the 4-out offense. Well, okay, on my weak side, I don't need to necessarily just have a down screen, a pin screen, or a UCLA screen or a flare screen. I can just interchange those two guys, and that just softens that help just enough that it actually allows my strong side attack to work. And then also when the help goes, then I have those kickouts available, and the defense is moved. They're not static where they're actually having to take additional steps to get to those positions. Versus
the screener defender the screener defender also is having to make they're having to make a decision because they'll guess wrong sometimes.
Right.
And that's that's where the space kind of comes from. So they're kind of second guessing themselves. Oh, wait a minute, are they going to ghost or are they going to set the screen? Do I follow him or do I go right with the ball handler?
You look at exactly. And that's the whole point of putting people in help dilemmas, but also putting people in matchup dilemmas too, which you're seeing more in the college game also, where, we saw that with Mackenzie Mbako, a couple of nights ago against UCLA where, Mac got on him and just blew by. Yeah. Well, then if Mbako steps off of him, then you're giving him a 3-point shot. So it's also one of those things where if you can create situations where, or especially using drop coverage, how do you, because then you have a ball screen up here. So the screener may go ahead and just attack or pop, but they hold off that on-ball defender. Well, if you're in drop coverage, you have a guy that's a 45% 3-point shooter, especially off the bounce, getting in and stretching it out. How are you going to stop that shot? You're going to have to bring your drop coverage up, which then opens up what's going on the other end. Yeah. So it also is a matter of how do you create situations off that where tags come over into an impact, because, and this would be a good example of that 45 cut or that burn cut, where if you have a guy that just fires through the lane off the weak side, guy turns their back, he fires through, that burn cut forces that defense to come over. Forces that defense to actually now have to account for the cutter, which then means that other cut, that other player coming up from the corner, maybe coming up to the wing slot area, now has a cleaner look, or maybe being there with the drive may just be there wide open in the corner for that. Yeah. So it's that quickness that you're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's why, again, like we said in the last segment, defense. Yeah, so many of those really good 3-point shooting teams, they usually had multiple attackers, but at least one, so like Jalen Brunson or Shabazz Napier, or with IU was Yogi Ferrell, like some guy that's really fast getting to the rim and just complete collapsing a defense and opening things up.
But if you also have
what's that?
If you have a Victor Oladipo that can burn cut you.
Yeah, exactly, that too. Yeah, I mean,
so you can attack it different ways.
Yeah, you need multiple guys technically that are a threat to get to the rim. I mean, it's having at least one is great, but if you have 2 or 3 that can get threat either with the ball in their hands or, like you said, like fast cutting, then that really kind of just makes the defense completely. In some ways, they have to kind of abandon the 3-point line sometimes, and that's the one thing that people don't always realize about 3-point defense is that when you're a coach of a team that's like going against one of those, like, again, like, the Baylors or the UConns, like, the top tier versions of those programs when they're winning championships. Sometimes they're giving up threes because that's the best option available to them. It's like if we just completely max defend the 3-point line, they're going to have a 70% a field goal percentage, and they're going to be spinning all day at the line because there's going to be at the rim constantly getting and ones, getting the easy layups, or we have to foul them like right at the rim. So sometimes just giving up the 3-point line and just praying to God that they're just having an off night, that's sometimes the best option you got available to you.
I would say part of that also is, what are you doing on the front ends of that? The front end of the play, like, are you just like the front end of the pass out, the kick out, or whatever that is? Because so many times I think that we just think, okay, a 3-point shot, all 3-point shots, all 3-point looks are created equally. They're not. Right. If I can get that ball handler to delay just enough time to get my defense better set, I can get a better closeout. Or if I can disrupt the pass where I can just disrupt that pass where the pass, you may not create a turnover off of it, but if you get a pass that hits perfectly in the shot pocket, and you got to think that you throw different types of passes as a player. Some of them are movement passes where you may be throwing away from the defense, or you're trying to get the ball into position to strike. But some of those striking action passes where you get downhill, land on 2 feet, and then kick it, pop it, dump it, whatever.
Yeah.
You're aiming for basically a small area right here. Catch, boom. Just so they can catch in rhythm.
Yeah.
If you can throw off the rhythm of the pass, that throws off the rhythm of the shooter.
Right.
And that's how subtle, when you're talking 1, 2, 3 possessions that decide a game, that additional detail makes a huge difference. Hey, if they catch a tough pass and make a tough shot, tip your cap, move on.
Yeah.
But if you're not disrupting them, or just disrupting them off cuts, disrupting them off screens, bumping here and there, switching, if you're continuously getting them to just not be, if you're continuously finding ways to disrupt them, then it makes a huge difference as to how that's kind of working with them. And I think that's what we're talking about, is that that defenses have to become more savvy, because I don't think you can, honestly, Mike, give up the line.
Yeah, you have, like you said, you have to do what you can to muddle it,
mitigate
as possible. But against those really elite teams, it's really difficult to say, we're going to completely like shut the 3-point line down. But you're right, it's like pressure on a quarterback in football. So you may not be able to get to the quarterback. If you can just get like one D lineman's hand like somewhere in his face, you can do a little bit of disruption and interrupting, like you said, the timing, then sometimes that's as best as you can do. And that's ultimately what you hope to do, especially if you're going against a team that chucks a lot of threes and makes them too.
And that's, again, as the game has continued to evolve, and this would be a question that we have to kind of continue, because you brought this up a couple of weeks ago to me. And I thought, you got a great point, because now as teams begin to jam that line more, and especially like drop coverage, everyone seems to be, not everyone, but a lot of programs are either using drop coverage, or they're either icing, dropping, or they're somehow no middling in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Okay, what does that leave that ball handler if he cannot get to the lane necessarily? That pull up 15-footer, which I think I can't statistically prove this, but I feel like we're seeing that more.
Yeah.
And I think that there may be that conversation where, as they start, okay, we're going to take the paint away and we're going to take the 3-point line away. There's all this space in here. Now, there's a difference between a sidestep 21-foot jump shot and, to me, basically attacking the elbows or the blocks, stopping short, jump stopping, and making a play, or trying to take the shot.
Yeah.
I think there may be a difference in that, because I also think guys are training to do it. I think guys are learning to do it.
Yeah, that's why I asked you, and I think I pushed that to like Tony and Sam as well, is that are the kids learning to take mid-range shots? Because that seems to be sort of like the area of opportunity in terms of, like, let's say, offensive development. As we've said before, basketball is always about action and reaction in terms of like how the sport is going. The teams are wanting more 3-point shooters. Okay, so we create more 3-point shooters, at the youth level in high school and college. Now defenses are trying to stop 3-point shooting, or at least like get in the way of it. What does that leave? Well, it leaves a lot of like mid-range shots. Are kids going to start learning to take that mid-range shot that they've kind of abandoned since, like the 70s and 80s? Because we watched like Galen's, YouTube page and watched the old like NBA stuff from like the 70s and 80s. I mean, those teams were amazing. Both the high-end NBA teams and the high college teams at hitting mid-range shots. Like Mike Woodson was an assassin from like 15, 16, 17 feet. But you don't really see guys like that anymore, coming out. So you're right. You're starting to see guys like Braden Smith come along. Like, think of how many times Smith is scoring off of typically it's like a ball screen about like from, Kaufman Wren, about the 17, 18-foot spot where he takes like 1 or 2 dribbles to the free throw line or the elbow point and taking up a pull up, and he's hitting a lot of them. And so you're right. If teams can get a guy like that, then it really changes the dynamics of the trade-offs that the defense has to make.
And I think that it's important to realize that it's a question of, shot grading comes into play also with video, with huddle, with synergy, and all these other different tools available to coaches at higher levels, high school and above, that you're actually able to put your kids down in film room and say, okay, grade your shots. Is it an A shot, B shot, D, A through F? Gold medal, I've heard gold, silver, bronze. I've heard, whatever, plus equals minus, whatever.
Gold star, green star. Yeah.
Right. All of those things that, and if you start thinking about, well, is that contested layup falling away from the basket because they funneled you to the block towards the block baseline and you're trying to get a rough angle on a layup?
Yeah.
Is that a better shot than you're attacking? And this was that Trey Galloway play against Purdue where he hit the gap. The scout report had him going all the way to the block.
Yeah.
He's wide open at like 12 feet. And he just puts a little floater and hits it.
Yeah.
That's a better shot than him just going to the block, which is where the scout had him going. So in that case, maybe the layup's a little better shot. I will, before we move on, because I think we can, I just want to say also transition offense makes a huge difference. That one of the biggest changes in the last probably decade has been how we run break, which is instead of your first two guys go down and attack it.
Yeah.
We're now spacing it out.
Yeah.
And guys like Izzo with the pitch aheads, either crossing the street, going forward, whatever, those types of situations where you're going to catch it, you don't have to move a defense if they're already running down the floor and trying to scramble.
Yeah.
And so many times getting a good 3-point look, you've put the defense into a scramble mode and you're popping the ball and moving it quickly. And if you wonder why some teams really, 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 really struggle at doing this, at getting good quality, high quality 3-point looks, part of it may be how quickly they're exploiting a defense that's in scramble mode.
Yeah.
Are they getting it off the strike? Are they getting good secondary scrambling actions and then making the one more pass to a guy that can hit the shot because they're in the right location?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, something that, transition is huge, as well as getting defenses in scramble modes, because you win closeouts or you get it on the floor quicker, you may find yourself getting a lot better. You can find yourself getting better looks and more efficiency.
Right. Yeah. Just thinking about like when we were growing up and like boys club basketball.
Oh yeah.
And a break was happening. What would happen if like one of us just decided, okay, I'm going to run to the far corner and just wait for an 18-footer.
I know.
What would our coaches say about that?
I can tell you coaches would say even well past boys club basketball going, what are you doing? It's like, attack. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been, and we've been making changes. We're still having debates as to where should we set this thing up at, because we're still saying, well, should we just run old school break?
Yeah.
Or do we run the new school stuff because that's where the game's going. These kids have to learn to play it. I mean, that's a conversation my coaches and I have. We've been having a lot this last year, trying to figure that out.
Exactly. All right. So on segment 3, wrapping up, we'll talk about IU, Kentucky, Michigan, and the coaching situation. Next on X's and Joes.
Welcome back to X's and Joes. I'm Bob Moats with my good friend Mike Wiemuth over there in Philly, and we're going to talk about coaching changes, because when Mike Woodson, it was announced he will no longer be the coach of Indiana University at the end of the season. At the end, the last game that IU plays will be his last game as coach. Immediately, we start going into, again, we talked about the papal conclave construct, and now everyone's saying, what do we want in a new pope? What do we know? And it's funny, I'm actually not even making that as kind of a double, that's actually not a deliberate thing I just said there.
Yeah.
You may find a new pope, is one of it may be kind of a double entendre there a little bit, because what we're really saying here, I think what I'm trying to say here is going back on your theory of opposites.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at that efficacy and that frequency rate at IU.
Yeah. On 3-pointers. Yeah.
On 3-pointers. I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to see a little different approach.
Yeah.
Coming in.
Yeah, if given that the last two coaches were very low frequency, low make 3-point coaches in terms of their national ranking. And again, the theory of opposites just holds that, ADs tend to look for coaches that have a strength that is the opposite of the worst weakness of the last coach that they let go. So, under that theory, you would think that there's a high premium that will come with the IU's next coach being a pretty decent, let's say, tactician when it comes to 3-point shooting and 3-point making. So
I feel we're going to see a much more open style of play.
And would you say modern at the same time?
Modern would be a great way to call it. I think we're going to see, and I even think going to the Crean level might be a little. We're going to go away from that too. It's more like you're going to see an attacker.
Yeah.
Like originally, if you're listening to this, and if you know, our original 2.3 was not going to be shifts in defense to the 15-footer. We were actually going to talk about the Butler way.
Yeah.
Honestly. And then last minute decision, we decided we're going to put some ice on that.
Yeah.
Not even going to talk about it, you know.
For now. Yeah. Exactly.
For now.
Yeah.
But Butler was one of those programs that, really kind of revolutionized the use of the 2-man game and getting the ball into position to shoot 3-point shots.
Yep.
And doing so with almost it was continuity ball screen offense.
Right.
And you look at that where it's more open form of game, for more open way of playing than even Crean's, who again got great looks out of his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we always jokingly say Tom Crean's offenses were so good, even he fooled everybody, including his own players. That it's one of those types of things that when you hear why certain coaches may be on a hot board and why others aren't, and why you hear some maybe critiquing going, why do we want this guy versus that guy?
Mm-hmm.
And it may not just even be the fact of volume of 3-point shooting, because that's where Mick Cronin gets into the conversation. Like, well, maybe Cronin, maybe not. Well, he's not. Don't just look at kind of the rates, look at the efficacy. Be careful looking at rankings, because rankings can be deceiving when you start thinking, well, they're in that they're in the lowest quartile.
Yeah.
When in reality, that lowest quartile might still be they're shooting the 3-point shot a third of the time.
Yeah.
And then that highest quartile starts at, they're shooting at 40% of the time or 38% of the time. So now we're talking, you're quibbling over 1 or 2 shots a game.
Yeah.
The question becomes, what does that translate?
Yeah.
But I do think you're going to see a change, because I think what Kentucky and Michigan both showed and Kentucky, I think, had almost a full turnover with Mark Pope and getting the roster.
Just about, yeah.
Dusty had some guys coming back, but he had a pretty major roster turnaround also, and he's doing this with not their. I think their guards are better than people say.
Yeah,
watching them play, they're better.
Yeah, Burnett and Donaldson are not terrible. Yeah, but they're pretty decent. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not running 2 guys named Floyd off as walk-ons as their guards. It's just they're just not.
Yeah.
It's not Simon and Bibby or something. It's just because people lose their minds over this sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it was Tristan Newton and the other dude Cam Spencer last year. That's. So I think that as we're looking at a coaching search, I think you hit the nail on the head that it's like we're going to look for somebody that's actually probably going to at least be able to articulate how they can play more open basketball, which conceivably means we're going to shoot the 3 ball better, or more often, or something.
Yeah, I think there's the strategic side of it, which is true. Wanting to have more 3-point shooting, because there are a lot of correlations even outside of just like the on-court performance. There's some degree of alignment in terms of recruiting capacity, especially when it comes to like guards and wings. Like there's a little bit of advantage, not 100% advantage, but there's an incremental advantage to having, let's say, a decent amount of scoring and 3-point shooting when it comes to trying to go after, let's say, like top 30, top 40 guards and wings. There's just a little bit of correlation there. So that definitely would help.
I'd also add on just to that real quick that you also want guards and wings who, you can either have a 40% 3-point shooter or a 35% 3-point shooter who can drive the ball and do some playmaking.
Yeah.
take the 35% guy.
Exactly. Yes. This is not the 1980s. You don't have like one shooter that shoots like 48%. You need like 3 or 4 guys that shoot 36 plus and can drive. Exactly. Yeah.
So
But yeah, but it's also just, there's the efficacy part of it. There's also just, I think, like
right.
we're always talking about sort of like fan sentiment and just the sort of like the PR side of things. If you've had 2 coaches in a row that ran an offense that was not particularly, let's say, exciting and did not have a lot of threes, if the next coach you bring in is also like that, they better be really good and they better win really fast, because let's say the patience and the level of toleration for any kind of underperformance for another low volume 3-point shooting coach and low make 3-point shooting coach is going to be very, very small. Like the fans will get very much angrier faster with that kind of underperformance versus, let's say, a guy that may have the same kind of problems, but is actually trying to shoot more threes, because fans will at least give a little bit more of some degree of relief and patience with that. It's like, oh, well, at least they're trying to shoot more threes. At least the offense isn't boring anymore. So
it's more open. It's more all these things. And again, you're looking at, we're looking at this from it. Like and then that's another guy comes in and does what Archie Miller did, which he basically got, like, he found all these different types of power forwards that he wanted to try.
Yeah.
Like 4 or 5 guys that were basically the 4.
Yeah.
You had Ray Thompson, Justin Smith. You had who else was in that? Jake Forrester, Clifton Moore, Jerome Hunter, Demezy Anderson. I mean, he had half a roster of guys that were basically slotted into a non-penetrating position. I mean, it was just like, hey, can Demezy Anderson play the 2? I mean, when you start asking that question when you're going into rosters, you're like, maybe we need to rethink some of this. So
yeah, exactly.
That's kind of the same thing too, as watch those early moves and just see what type of players they're bringing in. Because I have a sneaking suspicion that the next guy isn't going to do that. Yeah. If anything, you're going to be thinking, we're going to be really small.
Yeah. Sometimes like the correction becomes slightly a bit of an overcorrection, and people are like, oh, wow, that's different. We're not used to that. But when fans get really just fatigued and tired of a particular type of system that hasn't worked, they're very open to having radical change within their roster. Let me put it that way.
Definitely so. And again, just kind of take it from a standpoint of looking at as we're getting closer, as we're seeing the marquee games, as you're looking at those types of teams and what they're doing and what programs are looking like, watch carefully the teams that are really good and just look at how big they are, how tall they are. Look at what those guys with size and strength can do. Mm-hmm. You're not seeing a whole lot of you're not seeing a whole lot of like Art Donovans running around college basketball right now for a very good reason. Yeah. And and I think so much of this is you have to really account for the fact that it's definitely a game where where the 3-point line is creating opportunities to attack in different ways. And so passing penetration into post or passing penetration into cutting from the perimeter cuts, like, what guys like Mike Woodson and Scott May did really well with, swinging back and forth for 15-foot jump shots. I mean, Ted Kitchell fit that model. Go down the list of like the IU swingmen all the way through Calvert Chaney into even a Charlie Miller, even into et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. It's a totally different feel and a totally different way of playing. And that's going back way too far, because in reality, it's a thing where teams are more and more realizing that they can actually space out a floor and break a defense differently because of what they have available, because of the line. Yeah. And so it's not just the fact that you shoot it, it's the fact that it's there and you have to account for it. And the fact that if you don't account for it, it's going to get you killed.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Good point, Bob.
All right. Well, my man, we're going to do this again, aren't we?
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Yeah, I think looking forward to episode, 26, coaching searches and hires, what to expect when you are expecting a new coach. And we're going to have another network pal on. Ryan Phillips from Assembly Call is going to be joining us.
Ryan Phillips, who we just found out in a conversation recently, is a proud owner of the ultimate unicorn of toys of our generation, the USS Flag.
Oh, is that the GI Joe aircraft carrier? Is that right?
Someone might have mentioned the USS Flag
Yeah.
on the episode. He'll remain nameless.
Okay.
And Ryan starts pointing, going, "I had that." I'm like,
well, we need some photographic evidence of that.
I want
San Diego in his attic. He's got
got to have a picture of him because we need evidence. So
yeah,
we're looking forward to having Ryan on, and a special thanks to John Ringer of ringdesign.com for designing the look of the show, and another great thanks to Bob Thompson for the music and the sound of the show that you heard today.
Yep, looking forward to it. So this endless conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, Right Up Meridian, The Dribble Drive, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and BackHomeNetwork.com. So until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
And I'm Bob Moats.
Have a good one, everybody.